Wells.
Funeral services for the 18-year-old were held inside a Mississippi church today, his casket arriving ahead of his visitation earlier today. The services come 2 weeks after his body was found in the water near a popular barrier island following a 4th of July boat trip there with friends. And as the investigation into his death remains ongoing.
NBC News national correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Aaron, talk about how loved ones honored Nolan Wells today.
Such an outpouring of support, Kate and Christine, for Nolan's family here today. We saw the sanctuary here filled with hundreds of people, so many of them former teammates from the high school that Nolan went to, and the teammates that he played with in college were there as well. A busload of them came in from the community college that he went to, really just to stand with Nolan's family and to show their support for the family and really to embrace the memory of the person that they considered a brother. I do want you to hear from Nolan's parents. His father spoke about how much pride he had in his son and the young man that he was becoming, and his mother spoke about the light that he brought into every room that he entered.
In a world that can often feel dark, be like Nolan. Be the light that brightens the lives of those around you. Be the warmth for those who may be feeling the coldness of the world. Love deeply, protect fiercely, and welcome others with kindness.
And ladies, you also saw Reverend Al Sharpton and Ben Crump standing on either side of Nolan's parents as well. They spoke about still demanding justice and still demanding a thorough and fair investigation into his death.
Aaron, authorities have released the incident report in this case. What more are we learning from that, and where does the investigation go from here?
I'll tell you, oddly, the incident report that we were able to obtain from law enforcement over the weekend, we asked Ben Crump, the attorney, whether he had gotten the incident report, and this afternoon he said that he had not received it. So we're trying to square that a little bit to see what information they've been able to get at this point. We do know from the sheriff that the investigation is still ongoing, and there are pieces that we know are still outstanding. We know that Nolan's phone has not been examined, despite the fact that both the attorneys' teams and the law enforcement investigators were supposed to be looking at that phone together. We are waiting to get more information about when that might happen and when it can be included in the ultimate final report from the investigation.
Tonight, a mother in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, is folding a dark blue outfit over a chair, laying out shoes that will never be worn again after tomorrow, and trying to sleep in a house that has not felt like home in more than 2 weeks. Because tomorrow morning, Christine Wansley is going to bury her 18-year-old son. And in the hours before that happens, 4 separate threads of this case have all moved at once, each one pulling the story in a different direction. The FBI has finally put its role in this investigation on a record, in writing, in full, for the first time since this story began 16 days ago. A young woman named Katie, the person Nolan Wells spoke with in the last confirmed minutes anyone can account for, has broken her silence, not through a cousin, not through a secondhand Facebook post from a relative, but face-to-face, sitting across from Nolan's own mother. Somewhere on the outer edge of this case, a family connected to one of the boys who was on that boat has become the target of a threat serious enough that federal agents are now formally involved. A detail confirmed not by rumor, but by the FBI itself. And at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, visitation begins at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs. The pews will fill with teammates, coaches, classmates, and strangers who never met Nolan Wells, but who have spent over 2 weeks refreshing their phones for updates on a boy they never knew personally, yet somehow cannot stop thinking about. We're going to walk through every one of these threads tonight, slowly, in order, and we're going to be honest with you the entire way about which parts of this story are confirmed on a record, and which parts are still traveling through the world as second-hand accounts, unverified claims, or outright fabrications. Because in a case exactly like this one, that distinction, confirmed versus unconfirmed, is the only thing standing between the truth this family deserves and one more rumor wearing a headline as a disguise. If this is the first time you are watching anything about Nolan Wells, here is what you need to know before we go any further. On the afternoon of July 4th, 2026, an 18-year-old football player from Ocean Springs, Mississippi went out to Horn Island with a group of friends to celebrate the holiday. Horn Island is a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, reachable only by private boat. There are no stores out there, no lifeguards, no cell towers that reliably hold a signal once you're far enough from the mainland. Just white sand, warm water, and on a holiday weekend, dozens of boats anchored along the same stretch of shoreline, engines cut, music carrying across the water. Sometime around 3 o'clock that afternoon, Nolan was last seen near the northwest tip of the island. His friends have told investigators that their boat began taking on water. A bilge pump had failed. They made the decision to head back toward the mainland. According to the accounts gathered so far, Nolan chose to stay behind, reportedly to keep talking with a young woman he had met on the island that day, with a plan to catch a ride home later with someone else. He never made it home. His mother reported him missing that night. A search launched the next morning involving the United States Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, volunteer search and rescue groups, including the United Cajun Navy, and eventually the FBI. On the morning of July 6th, a National Park Service ranger found his body in the water off the same stretch of coastline where he had last been seen alive. He was identified through dental records, not through a visual identification by anyone who loved him, a detail that on its own tells you something about the condition investigators were working with. That is where this story begins.
Surrounding a Mississippi teen. The body of Nolan Xavier Wells was recovered Monday, days after he vanished during a 4th of July boat trip with friends to an island off the Gulf Coast. It is part of a national seashore famous for its beaches. The 18-year-old's family is now searching for answers. Skylar Henry joins us with more. Skylar, good morning.
Hey, Adriana, good morning to you. The Jackson County, Mississippi Coroner's Office is awaiting autopsy and toxicology results to determine how Wells died. Meanwhile, civil rights attorney Ben Crump is calling on authorities, he represents the family, calling on authorities to pursue this case with both urgency and transparency.
After an intensive days-long search, police say they found 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells' body Monday near Horn Island, roughly 10 miles off of Mississippi's Gulf Coast. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office says he was last seen on the island around 3 p.m. on July 4th after taking a boat trip there with friends, but he did not return with the group. His mother reported him missing that night. 2 days later, he was found dead on the island's northwest corner.
There was guys that looked like they were in law enforcement attire standing on the beach, and then I could see what looked to be a body laying on the beach.
Brian Trasher is with the United Cajun Navy, a volunteer organization that helps search for Wells. He said people told him there was a strong rip current coming off the island on the 4th.
If you're not suspecting of it or you don't know about it, even if you're a strong swimmer, you know, you could be swept off your feet and carried out a couple hundred yards before you even have a chance to react.
In a Facebook post Wednesday, Wells' mom wrote in part, "Missing our Nolan so much every second of every day. This has been the worst time in our lives." Prior to his death, the 18-year-old was a student at Southwest Mississippi Community College where he played football.
These kids go to the island all the time. There's nothing out of the norm, man. It was just so heartbreaking, you know. He had so much life ahead of him to live, man, and a bright future, you know, and it's just devastating.
The sheriff's office is calling this an active investigation, and amid online speculation, they're also asking for anyone who has unedited, big emphasis on unedited photos or videos from that area on July 4th to come forward. They're also asking for anyone who may have seen or heard any sort of confrontation or arguments or saw unusual activities in that area to say something as well. Vlad.
All right, Skylar, thank you very much. This is just absolutely heartbreaking, and your heart goes out to the family.
Absolutely, and so many questions in this investigation, which hopefully will come forward.
There are so many questions, a lot of speculation. I'm glad there's an investigation, and it's interesting that the police has put out a call for videos or any kind of photos that might show something that will give them a clue to what happened.
Everything since then has been a fight for two things this family has still not received 16 days later. An explanation for how their son died, and a full accounting of every single minute of that afternoon that nobody, to this day, has been able to completely reconstruct. Tonight, some of those minutes just got a little less dark. Some of them, unfortunately, got darker. Before we go one sentence further into GPS coordinates and legal terminology, we want to spend real time on the part of this story that keeps getting buried underneath all of it, because it's the only part that actually matters in the end. Nolan Xavier Wells was a graduate of Ocean Springs High School, where by every account he was a standout multi-sport athlete, and he went on to play wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. Friends, teachers, and coaches describe him the way people describe someone who made a room feel lighter simply by walking into it. Energetic, warm, big-hearted, the kind of young man who, according to more than one person who actually knew him, never met a stranger in his life. He had just finished a school year, just walked across a graduation stage, and was building toward a football future at the next level. He had his entire life sitting directly in front of him, still unopened, the way it's supposed to look when you're 18 years old and the whole world hasn't told you no yet. The Ocean Springs School District released a statement in the days after his death, saying they were devastated by his passing and that they remain heartbroken for his family and everyone who knew him. That is not a formality. If you look at how this community has responded in the weeks since, marches organized by his own teenage peers, a school district speaking about a former student with genuine grief rather than a press release tone, a hometown that has not once stopped talking about him, you start to understand that Nolan Wells was not simply well-liked. He was, in the way small towns sometimes produce exactly one person like this per generation, someone who touched an entire community without ever trying to. The night before the 4th of July trip, Nolan cooked salmon for his parents. It is a small detail, almost too ordinary to even mention, except that ordinary details are exactly the ones that become unbearable in hindsight. A son cooking dinner for the people who raise him, the night before he left the house for what turned out to be the last time. He hugged his mother, told her he loved her, and went to spend the night with friends ahead of the holiday, the same way thousands of 18-year-olds do every single summer without incident. His mother, Christine Wansley, has spoken publicly more than once about what these past 2 weeks have felt like from the inside. She has described her own mind as, in her words, mush, her emotions scattered in every direction at once. She has said that this has been unbearably hard, not only for her and her husband Elmore, but for Nolan's siblings as well, an entire family now reorganized permanently around a hole that used to be a person. That is a version of Nolan Wells his family wants the world to remember. Not a name inside a legal filing. Not a contested timestamp on a GPS printout. A young man who cooked dinner for his mom the night before he disappeared, and who by every single account from the people who actually knew him best, made other people feel like they mattered. Keep that image close, because everything we are about to walk through tonight, the GPS data, the phone records, the contradictory witness statements, the FBI's carefully worded statement, all of it exists because a family is trying to find out exactly what happened to that same young man in the hours after he said goodbye to his mother for the final time. Before we go any further tonight, we want to say something directly to you, honestly, without the usual script. We've noticed something in our numbers recently that's worth being upfront about. Far more of you are watching these updates than are actually subscribed to this channel. If you found real value in how carefully we're covering this case, tonight and in every video before it, the single best way to make sure you never miss a confirmed update is to hit that subscribe button right now, before you keep scrolling. We're not asking for anything except that you stick around for the truth as it actually comes in. Thank you for trusting us with this story. Now let's get back into it. To understand why this case exploded the way it did, you have to understand the very first sentence law enforcement said publicly about it, because that single sentence has shaped almost everything since. In the days after Nolan's body was found, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter told reporters that investigators did not currently suspect foul play. There is no information that we have right now, he said, that would lead us to believe that a crime has occurred. That sentence, delivered in the earliest, most chaotic hours of this case, before a single toxicology result existed, before anyone had mapped the boat's movements, before Katie's name had ever entered the public record, became the single most consequential thing anyone in an official capacity said about this case. It was, according to more than one legal analyst who has since reviewed the case publicly, a poor choice of words that led to widespread misunderstanding. It may have been more accurate in hindsight to say there were no immediate, obvious signs of foul play, which is closer to what the coroner himself actually told reporters at the time. But the sheriff's phrasing landed differently. It read, "To a family already reeling and to a national audience watching in real time, like a case being quietly waved through before anyone had actually finished investigating it. It's worth remembering what the coroner, Bruce Lynn, actually said in that same window. There were no immediate, obvious signs of foul play or trauma on Wells's body," he told reporters. But given the uncertain circumstances surrounding how an 18-year-old competitive athlete ends up alone on a remote island and never returns, his office asked the state medical examiner to conduct a full autopsy specifically to determine whether there was any foul play or trauma the initial examination might have missed. That is a meaningfully different statement than the sheriff's public line. One says nothing points to a crime. The other says we don't yet know enough to rule anything out, and we are testing for exactly that. Locals who spend their lives on and around Horn Island have offered their own perspective in the weeks since, and it deserves to be part of this record too.
What was supposed to be a boat party with friends celebrating the 4th of July has turned into a mystery making national headlines.
Now to the urgent search for answers in the death of Nolan Wells.
This is a horrifying story because our hearts go out to the family of 18-year-old Nolan Wells.
The body of 18-year-old college football player Nolan Wells found off the coast of Mississippi early Monday morning.
We want that same respect that would be given to anybody else, and that's it. We just want answers.
Wells went missing on the afternoon of the holiday. His friends all came back alive. Wells did not. His body was discovered 2 days later. Authorities initially telling ABC News they suspected no foul play.
At this point, there's no information that would lead us to believe that a crime had been committed. Now, that's why we're still asking for information if anybody has any knowledge.
But Wells's parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley, want answers, speaking publicly for the first time to our Michael Strahan, addressing the questions and controversy swirling around his death.
We are doing this because at the end of the day, I would hope any parent would fight for their kids to find out if anything happened, what did happen. We want a thorough investigation.
Investigators are now combing over video taken on Horn Island around the time Wells was last seen alive, including this clip from social media that has gone viral, the contents of which are unclear.
I don't know the origins of that video at this point, but yes, we are looking into it, and that's been brought to our attention.
The mystery behind Nolan Wells' disappearance and death only grows as you dive deep and deeper into this story.
Wells was a standout high school football player, going on to be a wide receiver at a community college, speaking to our Biloxi, Mississippi affiliate on the day he signed.
It's truly a blessing, just being here with some of my best friends, teammates, and we're all going to college together, most of us, so it's just truly a blessing to be here.
Nolan was such a great person. He was just a happy young man that made everybody smile and just made your day brighter.
He was liked by all. It was not a friend that he couldn't make.
Wells's mother says he went on a day trip with friends to Horn Island for the holiday. It's an undeveloped barrier island about 8 miles off the coast of Mississippi that can only be reached by private boat. The group left from Ocean Springs less than 30 minutes away from the island. Authorities say he was last seen near the northwest end of Horn Island around 3 p.m.
When the initial boat went to leave back, whoever was the boat operator, they left and went back without Nolan. From what we understand, he chose to stay there.
Why would he stay behind?
That we cannot answer. I can't fathom why he would.
We always taught him to, if you go with a group, you stay with a group.
That night, one of Wells's friends and his mother separately reported him missing. By Sunday, an all-out search was underway for Wells. But it wasn't until just before 9 a.m. on Monday, a body was discovered by a U.S. Park Service ranger. It was Wells. That evening, investigators initially told ABC News that they suspected Wells had drowned, something his parents say was unlikely because they say Wells was a good swimmer. Nolan's parents quickly reached out to civil rights attorney Ben Crump and will be conducting an independent autopsy and investigation.
It is because the family has distrust of the Mississippi law enforcement officials giving them a fair investigation where their black son ended up dead after going out on a boat with 3 young white men. The history of Mississippi is something that they don't just read about in books, but it's a lived experience for many black Americans.
Wells's mother recovered her son's phone from a friend who said the kids commonly leave their phones on the boat to avoid losing or damaging them in the water. Wells's parents say they are worried messages or data may have been deleted.
We went in his Snapchat. There was absolutely nothing. No saved videos. And even my sister was like, yeah, that's suspicious.
At this time, we do not have the cell phone that they speak of, but it is, to my understanding, that we requested the cell phone for an extraction.
After our experts be able to examine the phone, we will let the Mississippi investigators examine the phone.
When you put all of those facts together, it only raises more red flags, more suspicion that something happened here that we don't know the full answers to. The only question is that something criminal or completely accidental?
The mysterious circumstances surrounding Nolan's disappearance and death sparking outrage on social media.
Because one thing I know a teenager is not doing is staying somewhere without a phone.
The case became a racial flashpoint.
They left from Mississippi to Horn Island, and his 3 white friends are the only ones that returned to the mainland.
Because if I'm taking a friend out, especially if my friend is a person of color, their safety is now my responsibility. Oh my God, why are we making this about race? Because it is.
Ashley Cole, a Mississippi judge and the mother of one of Nolan's friends on the boat, took to Facebook to dispel some rumors with facts, writing, "Our son Warren loved Nolan dearly." Cole had deactivated her account as her son and other friends faced scrutiny after Wells's death. She wrote, "No one in our family is trying in any way to impede with the investigation by law enforcement," adding, "Warren was interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and cooperated fully." Cole said her son left Wells because the boat was taking on water and had a mechanical issue. Nolan, she said, made a decision to stay on the island and return inland later with another group of friends.
He knew to stay with his group. So why would he split from his group? I don't know.
Investigators are asking anyone who may have seen Wells or has any photographs or videos from that day on Horn Island to come forward.
At this point, our main objective and our priority is to produce an accurate and professional and very thorough investigation into the death of Nolan, for the sake of his family and for the sake of the community.
The state medical examiner performed an autopsy on Wells's body Tuesday. Officials say it could take a couple of weeks for results to come back. Wells's family say they hope to have answers sooner than that.
We just want to know. We just want to know what happened and why our baby didn't come home.
And of course, we'll continue to follow the story as it unfolds.
Even though it does not resolve anything on its own, several people who regularly visit the area, speaking anonymously because of the intensity of media attention surrounding this case, describe the waters around Horn Island as deceptively dangerous. One boat operator who has spent years around that stretch of coast put it plainly. He said he personally knows people who grew up out there and died out there, that the experience humbles you fast regardless of how strong a swimmer you are, and that the currents can take hold of you before you even realize you are in trouble. That perspective matters, and it deserves to be weighed honestly. It is also true that Nolan's own legal team, through attorney Ben Crump, has pushed back directly on the idea that drowning alone explains what happened, pointing out that Nolan was a trained athlete who knew how to swim. Both of those things can sit in the same sentence without contradicting each other. A strong swimmer can still drown under the right combination of conditions: exhaustion, current, distance from help. And a family that has watched every other detail in this case shift and contradict itself has every reason to want more than a local anecdote about dangerous currents before accepting that as the full explanation for their son's death. This is precisely why two separate autopsies now exist, running on two separate tracks, and why 16 days later, neither one has produced a public answer. As of the night before Nolan's funeral, here's exactly where both medical investigations into his death actually stand, according to the most recent reporting available. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performed an official autopsy on July 7th, the day after Nolan's body was recovered. Coroner Bruce Lind has confirmed that examination took place. What it found, specifically the cause and manner of death, has still not been released. The office is waiting on results from toxicology testing, a process that routinely takes days to weeks depending on lab capacity, and there is still no announced date for when those results will become public. Separately, the family commissioned an independent autopsy, conducted by a private pathologist with no ties to Mississippi, working entirely outside the state system. That examination has been delayed more than once, according to the family's legal team, initially due to complications transporting Nolan's body to Washington, D.C., where the exam was performed. As of the day before the funeral, those independent findings have also not been released. Attorney Ben Crump has said only that the family hopes to share them soon, the same phrase his team has used for more than a week now. We want to be completely clear about something, because it matters enormously for how you should read everything else in this update. As of tonight, 16 days after Nolan Wells disappeared and on the eve of his funeral, there is no publicly released cause of death, not from the state, not from the family's own independent examiner. Both processes remain sealed. That gap, real information arriving slowly for entirely legitimate scientific reasons, sitting next to a public desperate for answers, is exactly the vacuum that bad information rushes to fill. And this week, it filled that vacuum in a way we need to address directly, because we nearly walked into it ourselves. While researching this very update, our team encountered an article claiming that leaked independent autopsy results already existed. The piece was written with real confidence. It described offensive wounds supposedly found on Nolan's forearms that the original examiners had allegedly missed. It quoted a forensic pathologist by name, offering polished, quotable lines about how a second autopsy uses targeted testing that municipal labs simply cannot afford. It cited a statistic claiming that a striking percentage of secondary autopsies uncover major discrepancies that change a case's entire cause of death. We checked every detail we could find. Not one credible outlet actually covering this case. Not CNN, not CBS News, not ABC News, not NBC News, not any of the established legal or true crime publications that have been reporting on this story since day one had published or confirmed a single word of it. The forensic pathologist quoted does not appear connected to this case in any verified record we could locate. The site itself had no track record covering law enforcement or criminal justice topics of any kind. The language was generic, built to rank for exactly the search terms millions of people are typing every single day right now. Nolan Wells autopsy results. Nolan Wells cause of death. Nolan Wells update. We want to say this plainly because it matters. That is fabricated content. It may have been written by someone chasing views or generated using automated tools designed to look convincing at a glance. But either way, it has no factual foundation whatsoever. And as of the writing of this script, no autopsy results of any kind, state or independent, have been made public. Understand exactly why content like that appears, and appears this quickly in a case like this one, when a story captures the attention of millions of people, but official information arrives slowly. For entirely legitimate reasons, laboratories do not speed up their process because a case goes viral, a massive information vacuum opens up. And a vacuum like that never stays empty. If the truth isn't ready yet, something else moves in to occupy that space instead. If you encounter any content claiming autopsy results already exist, no matter how specific it sounds, no matter how professional the language reads. Ask one question before you believe a single word of it. Does this appear on an outlet you can actually verify independently? If the answer is no, the odds are overwhelming that what you're reading is not true. For nearly 2 weeks, one question about this case only ever got answered in fragments. Why is the FBI here at all? Early on, the public had almost nothing beyond a passing acknowledgement from Sheriff Ledbetter that his department had been in contact with the Bureau. That single admission spun off days of speculation. Some corners of the internet treated FBI involvement as proof this case had quietly been escalated into something far more serious than a drowning investigation. Other corners treated it as evidence of the opposite entirely, a federal agency stepping in to help manage a story rather than investigate one.
We are continuing to push for answers on what happened to Nolan Wells. He's the teen presumed dead after his body was found out on Horn Island. Today, an autopsy is being done at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office Coast Crime Lab, and Will Polston is outside the lab now with what he knows. Will?
Well, good morning, Brandy. Good morning, everybody joining us. If you've been keeping up with us here at WLOX, you know the case and the story of Nolan Wells, who had disappeared back on July 4th, and then a body presumed to be him was discovered yesterday around 8:45 a.m. Here behind me in the forensics lab is where hopefully the family will get some new answers. While the family did take to social media and say that the body was Nolan Wells, the coroner of Jackson County, Bruce Lind, says he's waiting for the DNA results from this test that will come back and confirm whether or not it is him. Of course, there is a lot of speculation that it is him, and with the family confirming and Sheriff Ledbetter of Jackson County also saying that he matched the description. And now also we're hoping that this, with the autopsy coming forward, now we don't know exactly when the results will come forward, but we do know that it was being conducted today. I was told this morning by Bruce Lind, the Jackson County coroner, as well. So we're going to get some answers. The family's going to get some answers revealing the cause of death and the condition in which Nolan Wells was found as well. We got a chance to speak with multiple agencies, including the United Cajun Navy, just talking about the looming questions that still stand that will hopefully be answered by this autopsy.
This week, the FBI's Jackson Field office ended that speculation the only way an agency like that realistically can. They issued a full on-the-record public statement. According to that statement, released directly to news outlets covering this case, the FBI has assisted with certain aspects of the investigation in which federal tools and partnerships proved valuable to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The statement is explicit that the Sheriff's Office is leading and will continue to lead this investigation. It describes what the Bureau itself calls a trusting, effective partnership between Jackson County and the FBI, built over many years of working side by side on complex investigations. And it confirms something that had, until this point, only existed as rumor and secondhand reporting. The FBI is separately investigating interstate threats directed at individuals connected to this case. Read that statement closely, because the tone of it tells you almost as much as the content does. This is not a press release announcing a breakthrough. It reads like an agency trying to lower the temperature around a question that had quietly been fueling anxiety and misinformation for days. Somebody at that field office clearly understood that unexplained federal involvement was doing more damage through silence than it ever could through a careful, measured, on-the-record statement. So they spoke, in writing for the first time. Federal agencies almost never comment publicly on the specifics of active investigations. The fact that the FBI broke that pattern here tells you they recognize just how much harm the ambiguity itself was already causing, both to public understanding of the case and, more importantly, to the people it was actually protecting. Here is the part of that statement that finally answers a question everyone has been asking for 2 weeks. The FBI confirms its efforts to specifically focus on interstate threats made against individuals connected to this case, and that this work is running parallel to the family's own independent investigation, not merge into it. Sit with that sentence for a moment, because it reframes something almost everyone following this case had been assuming. Federal involvement here was never primarily about how Nolan Wells died. It is, at least in significant part, about protecting people connected to the story from threats serious enough to cross state lines and become a federal matter entirely on their own. For a threat to qualify as an interstate matter, it typically has to travel across state lines through some channel, a phone call, a text message, an online post, a piece of mail. That is exactly the kind of case federal agents are structurally built to handle, regardless of how large or small the underlying local investigation happens to be. It does not require Nolan's death itself to be classified as a federal matter. It only requires that someone, somewhere, use an interstate channel to threaten someone connected to the story. We want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing separating responsible coverage from coverage that makes an already painful situation worse. The FBI statement does not specify who received these threats. It does not specify what the threats actually said. Multiple outlets covering the story, including Newsweek, have noted the exact same gap, confirming only that the FBI is investigating interstate threats directed at individuals connected to the case, without naming those individuals or detailing the content of what was sent. Separately, less careful reporting circulating online has attached more specific, more graphic claims of particular families connected to this case, specifically to boys who were on that boat with Nolan. We are not going to repeat the specific content of those claims here tonight, because they have not been confirmed by any official source with the actual authority to verify them. Not the FBI, not the sheriff's office, not the district attorney. What we can tell you, because it comes directly from the FBI's own confirmed statement, is that real interstate threats did occur against real people connected to this case, and federal resources are actively working to address them. There's a reason official statements often stay deliberately vague on specifics like this, even when the underlying situation is genuinely serious. Naming a specific victim or repeating the specific language of a threat can cause additional harm. It draws even more attention to the exact people an investigation is trying to shield, and it can compromise whatever legal consequences might eventually follow for whoever sent it. That restraint might leave the public wanting more detail than they're getting. It is very likely a deliberate protective decision, not an attempt to hide anything. Here is what is beyond any dispute whatsoever. Whoever is sending threats to anyone connected to this case, regardless of what they personally believe happened to Nolan Wells, regardless of how strongly they feel about it, is committing a serious federal crime. Grief does not grant permission to threaten a teenager. Suspicion does not grant permission to threaten a parent, a friend, or a judge's family. Public pressure does not grant permission to threaten anyone at all. That much is true no matter whose name eventually attaches to which specific threat, and no matter which side of this case that person believes they're standing on. And it is worth thinking honestly about the chilling effect this has on the investigation as a whole. Every witness in this story, every friend, every family member, every young woman who happened to spend 20 minutes talking to Nolan on a beach is watching this unfold in real time, watching what happens to people who get named publicly, if coming forward or simply being identified, carries the real risk of threats serious enough to draw federal attention. That is a genuine disincentive for anyone who might otherwise be willing to share information that could actually help close the gaps in this timeline. Protecting people from retaliation is not just basic human decency in a moment like this. It is directly tied to whether this investigation ever gets the full, honest cooperation it actually needs in order to reach an answer. We are going to hold that same restraint in our own coverage tonight, and we'd ask that you hold it too in the comments below and anywhere else you discuss this case. We are not going to speculate about who sent what or repeat unverified specifics simply because they are circulating loudly elsewhere. Every family connected to this case, whether they are mourning a son tomorrow morning or defending their own child's name in the middle of a national spotlight they never asked for, deserves to not have their fear turned into content for someone else's engagement numbers. We want to pause here for just a moment. Getting a statement like the FBI is exactly right, word for word, and separating it from the swirl of unverified claims sitting right next to it online takes real time and real care. That kind of work only makes sense for us to keep doing if enough of you are actually part of this community to make it worthwhile. Right now, A lot more of you are watching these videos and are subscribed to this channel. If tonight's breakdown helped you actually understand what the FBI did and did not confirm, please take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps us keep doing this the right way, case by case, fact by fact. Thank you. Let's keep going. Now to the development that may change the shape of this case more than anything else that has happened in the last 2 weeks. Katie is a young woman Nolan spent time in the last confirmed minutes of his life that anyone has been able to account for. For most of this case, her name existed only as something other people said about her. First through a family friend relaying secondhand information to Nolan's mother in the earliest, most frightening hours of this case. Then through Katie's own sister, posting publicly on Facebook to correct rumors that had spiraled out of control online. Rumors that at one point falsely suggested Katie herself might also be missing. An entirely separate fear stacked on top of an already unbearable night for Christine Wansley. What nobody had, until this week, was Katie's own account, delivered directly, without a single intermediary standing in between. According to Christine, she and Katie sat down together, in person, face to face. And Christine has said plainly that what Katie told her does not match the version of events Nolan's friends have given investigators and the public. This is worth sitting with, because it represents a genuine shift in how reliable this piece of the story now is. Everything attributed to Katie before this point arrived filtered through someone else's memory of conversation, someone else's understanding of what she meant, someone else's choice of which details to include and which to leave out. A meeting between Katie and Christine changes that entirely. This is, as far as anyone following this case publicly knows, the first time information about that final conversation has traveled directly from the person who actually lived it to the person who needs to understand it most, with nothing standing between them. Here is what that account actually says, and we want to walk through it carefully, because the details matter enormously, and because Katie's account is more specific and more limited than a lot of the public conversation surrounding it has suggested. According to Christine, Katie has been consistent from the very beginning. She and Nolan met that day on the island, spent time together, and eventually the two parted ways. Katie then got back on a boat with her own group of friends, entirely separate from Nolan's boat. Based on their conversation, she assumed Nolan was heading back to rejoin his own friends before their boat left the island. Here is the detail that matters more than almost anything else in this entire account. Katie never actually saw Nolan get on that boat. She assumed it, based entirely on what he told her in conversation. She did not personally witness him rejoining his group. That distinction changes what this contradiction actually is. It is not a clean eyewitness clash. One person claiming to have seen one thing, while another group claims to have seen the exact opposite. It is closer to this. Nolan told Katie his stated intention. Whether he actually followed through on that intention before whatever happened next is something nobody, not Katie, not the friends, not the family, not a single investigator working this case, can currently confirm firsthand. Think about what that actually means. An honest assumption based on a real, specific conversation, and a separate claim from a friend group that Nolan chose deliberately to stay behind are not automatically incompatible statements. Both could be true at different moments, if something changed in the time between that conversation and whatever happened next. Nolan could have genuinely told Katie he planned to head back to the boat, and something, a delay, a change of mind, a decision made somewhere in the minutes that followed, could have altered that plan before the boat actually pulled away. It is worth asking honestly why this nuance got flattened so quickly the moment it hit public conversation. A clean contradiction. One person says this, another group says the exact opposite, makes for a far more dramatic story than an honest assumption ever will. But Katie's actual position, as it has been relayed by Christine, is more measured than that. She is not claiming she personally watched Nolan walk toward a boat and physically board it. She is saying he told her a plan, and she had every reasonable expectation, based on that conversation, that he would follow through on it. That is a meaningfully different kind of account than a flat, direct eyewitness contradiction, and it deserves to be treated with that distinction fully intact, rather than collapse into a simple, tidy, he said, she said. This also reframes, at least partially, what actually still needs to be explained here. If Katie's account is accurate, the mystery is no longer whether Nolan wanted to leave the island. It becomes what happened in the gap between him stating that intention out loud and whatever came after it. A gap that, as of tonight, nobody with first-hand knowledge has been able to account for. We also want to spend a moment on the other side of this collision, because there's a second family living inside this story who never asked to be part of it, and who deserves to be treated with the same care we're asking everyone to extend to Nolan's own family. Katie is a young woman who went to an island on a holiday, spoke with someone for part an afternoon, said goodbye, and went home safely with her own family that same day. Within days, her first name had become a national search term. Her family's public statement exists, as far as anyone can tell, only because online speculation about her had already spread in ways her family never invited and never expected. Whatever the eventual answer in this case turns out to be, nothing in the public record accuses Katie of anything. By every account, including from Nolan's own family's legal team, she has done exactly one thing consistently since this began: told the people who needed to hear it what she actually remembers. That is precisely why we are not sharing her age, her school, or any details from her personal life anywhere in this coverage. Her account matters to this investigation. The rest of her life does not belong to it, and it never should. For 2 weeks, this case ran almost entirely on human memory, and human memory bends. Not always because someone is lying. Sometimes it bends from loyalty, sometimes from fear, sometimes simply because memory does what memory always does under the pressure of trauma and a national spotlight nobody in that friend group ever expected to be standing under. Then a different kind of witness entered this case. Not a person, a machine. GPS tracking data obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the state agency that led the initial search effort before the Jackson County Sheriff's Office formally took over as lead investigating agency on July 5th, has reconstructed the movements of the boat carrying Nolan's group of friends across nearly the entire day of July 4th. Here is what that data shows, laid out in order minute by minute. At 9:56 in the morning, the boat leaves a private dock in the Ocean Springs area. At 11:14, it arrives at Horn Island. For the next several hours, the record simply reflects what a holiday looks like on a Gulf Coast barrier island. A boat anchored offshore while a group celebrates on the sand. One of dozens of boats doing exactly the same thing along that stretch of coast that day, indistinguishable in the moment from any other 4th of July gathering happening up and down that shoreline. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Nolan is last seen near the island's northwest tip. This is the single moment everything in this entire case orbits around. Then, according to the GPS record, at 4:31 in the afternoon, the boat leaves Horn Island. Nolan is not on it. Stop on that number for a second, because it quietly rewrites something a large portion of the public had believed for the better part of 2 weeks. Earlier accounts relayed through investigators and attorneys suggested the group left the island close to 3 o'clock, right around the same time Nolan was last confirmed seen. The tracking data says something different. The boat did not actually pull away until 4:31 in the afternoon. That means there is roughly 90 minutes sitting between the last confirmed sighting of Nolan Wells and the moment his ride home actually departed the island. 90 minutes that no account from anyone, not the friends, not Katie, not any witness who has spoken publicly, has ever fully described in detail. Where was Nolan during that hour and a half? Where were his friends during that same window? What actually happened on that stretch of sand while the tide came in and the afternoon wore on toward evening? The data cannot answer that question. It can only prove conclusively that the gap exists. And until this week, nobody outside the small circle of people who were actually there knew that it did. That distinction between a story and a record is the entire difference between speculation and investigation. For 2 weeks, this case ran on human accounts that could bend under pressure. One piece of tracking data arrived, and within days it exposed a 90-minute hole that every human version of that afternoon had, whether intentionally or not, quietly smoothed over. The tracking data does not stop there. after 4:31. The record shows the boat returning to its original departure dock. If the story had ended there, it would have been an unremarkable end to an ordinary holiday outing gone slightly wrong. It did not end there. At around 5:52 that evening, the boat is moving again, traveling into Fort Bayou, a nearby waterway. By 6:06, it is back at the dock. By 7:19, its position shifts once more to the Fort Bayou boat launch. From there, according to the Marine Resources report, the boat comes out of the water entirely. It travels over land, described carefully in the report's own language as presumably towed by a vehicle, to a residence in Biloxi belonging to the boat's owners. Notice that word, presumably. The GPS tracker can see the boat move down a highway. It cannot see the trailer or the truck actually pulling it, so the report refuses to claim more than its own data can genuinely support. That is what disciplined evidence handling looks like, and it is the exact same standard every single account in this case, ours included, should be held to. Count the sequence again. For separate recorded movements after the moment Nolan was left behind on that island. Not one direct trip home followed by a quiet driveway, but a series of stops across the evening, ended with the boat pulled entirely out of the water and parked at a private residence in another city entirely. All of this happened while, across town, Christine Wansley was beginning the longest night of her life. By 7:19 that evening, she still had hours to go before the phone call that would tell her Nolan had not come home at all. We want to be just as clear about the limits of this evidence as we have been about its significance, because overstating what a GPS record can actually prove would be its own kind of misinformation. Location data proves where a boat physically went. It does not prove who was on board at any given point, what was said between any of the people involved, or what actually happened on that island in the time before the boat pulled away. Moving a boat, cleaning a boat, hauling a boat home for the night. These are all things boat owners do on a completely ordinary basis. The track sequence by itself is not evidence of any crime. What the record does is narrow the world. It replaces 2 weeks of vague approximation with exact, unforgiving timestamps. And every account anyone gives from this point forward, to investigators, to a potential grand jury, to the public, is going to have to fit inside them. Be equally careful about what the 90-minute gap does and does not license. It is not by itself evidence that something sinister necessarily filled that window. Islands like Horn Island get crowded and chaotic on a holiday weekend. Groups scatter across long stretches of shoreline. Teenagers lose track of time in the middle of a party atmosphere, the same way they do at every beach in America on the 4th of July. What the gap does is convert a vague, hand-waved afternoon into a specific, concrete investigative demand. Every single person who was on or near that stretch of Horn Island between 3 o'clock and 4:31 that day now holds a piece of this case, whether they realize it or not, whether they ever intended to be part of it or not. That is exactly why the sheriff's office has kept its public appeal open, asking anyone with original, unedited photos or video from that stretch of the island on July 4th to come forward, particularly anything depicting alleged altercations or anything believed to include Nolan himself. Somewhere in a stranger's camera roll, time stamped by the same unforgiving clock that produced this GPS record, may sit the frames that finally fill in that 90-minute hole. 2 more details from that Marine Resources report deserve to be part of this record. The report notes that the boat's owner, the owner's mother, and another individual who was reportedly with Nolan that day have all cooperated with investigators. And the department's own report ends precisely on July 5th, the exact day the Jackson County Sheriff's Office formally took over as lead agency. Whatever has been learned from interviews, physical evidence, and further digital forensics since that handoff sit inside the sheriff's file, unreleased, waiting for the process the rest of this update is about to walk through. If the GPS record gave investigators the shape of that afternoon, a separate piece of evidence gave them the sound of it. Through a public records request, several national outlets obtained audio of an emergency call placed by the operator of the boat carrying Nolan's group of friends. It is worth listening to closely, because it is the first piece of this case that arrived not as testimony recalled days or weeks later, but as a recording captured in the exact moment it happened. Before anyone on that boat knew that within hours, the entire country would be scrutinizing every word they said. On the recording, the caller's voice is tense but clear. He tells the dispatcher they are sinking, that a bilge pump has failed, and asks for help. The dispatcher asks whether everyone on board is safe. Yes, comes the answer. Everyone is on board. The caller adds that he wants the boat pulled out of the water and towed back. This recording confirms something that had, until this point, existed only as second-hand testimony from a friend group. The mechanical failure was real. It was not a story invented after the fact to explain an otherwise difficult decision to leave without Nolan. According to reporting on the emergency records, the boat was towed several miles before it was able to operate normally again. But listen to that recording again, carefully, and notice what it does not do. It does not answer the single biggest question hanging over this entire case. It does not explain why Nolan Wells was not on that boat when the emergency call was placed. It confirms exactly one fact, that the vessel carrier's friends genuinely broke down that afternoon. It says nothing at all about where Nolan was in that moment, or why he was not among the group being asked whether everyone was safe. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it is a good example of something true about evidence in general, and about this case in particular. Confirming one detail inside a larger account does not confirm the entire account around it. The boat really did break down. That much is now as close to a fact as recorded audio can make anything settled. Why Nolan was not on it when it did remains an entirely separate question, and that question still has no answer. The friend group itself has not spoken with one unified voice throughout this case, and it's worth walking through who has actually gone on the record, because their accounts carry different weight depending on how directly they were given. Judge Ashley Cole, the mother of Warren Hudson, one of the young men who was on the boat with Nolan that day, has spoken publicly on her son's behalf. According to her account, the group left the island around 3 o'clock, right around the same time Nolan was last confirmed seen, after the boat began taking on water. She has said her son cooperated fully with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, and she has stood behind the account that Nolan chose on his own to stay on the island rather than return with the group. She remains, as far as the public record shows, the only parent connected to the friend group who has spoken this directly and this consistently in support of that version of events. Separately, Trayston Shepard, a close friend of Nolan's who was also on the island that day, has given multiple on-the-record interviews, including the ABC News and the Biloxi Sun-Herald, declining to appear on camera because, in his words, he and his friends have been receiving death threats since this case began. Shepard has said he last saw Nolan sometime after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, not 3, hanging out with a young woman and other friends, a detail that itself introduces a small but real discrepancy in the timeline, since 3 o'clock has been a figure repeated almost everywhere else in this case. He has also said that both he and Nolan left their phones behind on the boat that day, which lines up with the broader account that phones were commonly left on board to protect them from the water. Shepard is also the person who has publicly and repeatedly clarified the identity of the voice in the viral argument video that spread across social media in the earliest days of this case. A correction we'll walk through again shortly, and he has said something else worth including here, in his own words, that cuts against the idea that his friend group has been uniformly guarded or evasive. He has said he wants people to let Nolan be remembered as the sweet guy he was, and that he wants the investigation to be allowed to continue, and the facts to be allowed to come out, rather than have the public decide the outcome before investigators do. There is a tension worth naming honestly between these two accounts and Katie's. All three describe roughly the same window of time on roughly the same stretch of island, and none of them fully agree with each other on the exact hour Nolan was last seen, on why he stayed behind, or on what happened immediately afterward. That is not, by itself, proof that anyone is lying. Large, chaotic gatherings on a holiday produce exactly this kind of fragmented memory, even in cases where nothing sinister has happened at all. But it is also exactly the kind of fragmentation that makes an investigation like this one so difficult to resolve quickly, and exactly why investigators have leaned so heavily on evidence that does not depend on anyone's memory at all. The GPS data, the emergency call audio, and eventually, the content of the phone that traveled home without its owner. While the machine data redrew the big picture of this case this week, Nolan's parents have spent the better part of 2 weeks cataloging a different kind of evidence entirely. Smaller details. None of them a headline on its own. Together, they form the answer this family keeps giving every time someone asks why they cannot simply accept the official account as finished and complete. Start with a piece of clothing. According to the family, an official report in this case described Nolan as wearing black shorts at the time he disappeared. Then a young woman who had been on the island that day reached out to Christine directly with photographs from that afternoon. In those photos, by Christine's account, her son is wearing blue. Black and blue are not colors a camera confuses. On its own, this reads like a simple clerical error, the kind of thing that can happen in any large, chaotic investigation involving dozens of witnesses and multiple agencies working simultaneously. But a mother who can no longer ask her son a single question does not have the luxury of dismissing something like that so easily. For her, an inconsistency inside an official document is not a footnote to skim past. It is a thread, and in a case built almost entirely on other people's memories, that is exactly the kind of thread a grieving family keeps pulling at night after night, until someone gives them a real answer. Then there are the keys. Before Nolan's body was ever found, while his parents were still holding on to the hope of a phone call telling them he was fine, they went to a friend's house to retrieve his car. By the family's account, a task that should have taken 3 minutes did not go that way at all. The friend at the door could not immediately locate the keys. He went back inside. Minutes passed, the kind of minutes that stretch unbearably when your child is missing and you are standing on someone else's porch, waiting for a stranger's memory to catch up to your panic. The keys eventually turned up, according to the family, in an unexpected spot inside the house. Maybe that is nothing at all. Teenagers misplace keys constantly, especially after a long, loud, chaotic holiday weekend. But for a family desperate for one single straightforward answer in the middle of the worst days of their lives, friction at the exact moment things should have been simple stop feeling like coincidence to them. And then there's the phone, the object this entire case keeps circling back to over and over, week after week. Nolan posted a Snapchat almost every single day. According to everyone who actually knew him, his digital life, by every account, was an open book, the kind of constant documentation that comes naturally to almost every 18-year-old in America. In the roughly 24 hours before his family recovered his phone, that book went completely blank. No posts, nothing at all. A silence that everyone who knew him agrees was entirely out of character for who he was. The family located the device on the evening of July 4th using a location-sharing app, and where they found it says almost as much as the silence itself does. It was at the home of one of his friends on the mainland, while Nolan was still out on an island 10 miles offshore. His phone had made it back to land without him. And by the family's account, when they finally opened it, messages and content they fully expected to find simply were not there anymore. None of these details, standing alone, tells anyone what actually happened to Nolan Wells. His own parents understand that better than anyone shouting theories online ever could. But laid side by side, a mismatched clothing color inside a report, keys that took too long to locate, a phone that crossed the water without its owner and arrived home silent and empty. These are the reasons this family says, again and again, that it cannot treat the official account as finished. Not because they have already settled on a theory of their own, because they still have questions that nobody has yet answered. On July 15th, in Pascagoula, Christine and Elmore Wansley walked into the office of Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath for their first face-to-face meeting with the prosecutor, whose office will ultimately decide what this case becomes. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the family, described the meeting afterward as respectful and candid, and produced the single biggest procedural development in this case since the search itself first began. The district attorney committed on the record to presenting this case to a grand jury once the sheriff's investigation is fully complete. Crump was direct about what the family is demanding from that process. Nolan's family still has no answers about how their son went to Horn Island and never came home. He said following the meeting, a thorough investigation must be completed, and the district attorney must put every relevant fact before the grand jury. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked. We want to be precise here, because this phrase carries more emotional weight in public conversation than it actually carries in strict legal terms. And this family has already had enough distortion thrown at them without us adding to it. A grand jury referral is not a verdict. It is not a criminal charge. It is not an announcement that investigators believe a crime occurred. The district attorney's own office has stressed publicly that in Jackson County, presenting an unnatural or unexplained death to a grand jury is standard procedure, not an accusation aimed at any specific person. Here is what it actually means in practice. A panel of roughly 15 to 25 ordinary citizens will eventually hear the evidence prosecutors choose to present, interviews, forensic findings, timelines, very likely including the GPS record we just walked through in detail. Those citizens, not the sheriff, not the family, not anyone shouting theories online, will decide whether that evidence supports probable cause to bring charges against anyone at all. Two more mechanics of this process are worth understanding clearly, because they will shape how the next stage of this case feels from the outside, and because misunderstanding them has already caused confusion once in this case. Grand jury proceedings are secret. Witnesses appear without media present, without the public in the room, and without defense attorneys able to cross-examine anyone. That secrecy is by design, meant to protect both the integrity of the investigation and the reputations of people who may ultimately never be charged with anything at all. And the legal standard the panel applies is probable cause, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It is a decision about whether charges are warranted, not a determination of guilt, which means that when this case eventually disappears behind that closed door, the silence that follows will not mean nothing is happening. It will mean the legal process is working the only way it is actually built to work. That same July 15th meeting produced a second agreement, and this one is genuinely unusual for a case still at this stage. Nolan's phone, the same device that returned to mainland without him and arrived home with content apparently missing, will be examined jointly. Forensic experts retained by the family will work alongside experts connected to the official investigation, conducting the extraction together and seeing the results at the exact same moment, rather than each side producing separate, competing findings afterward that would inevitably be disputed. It is worth understanding why this arrangement matters so much. This particular piece of evidence has a trust problem running in both directions at once. The family retrieved the phone themselves, using a locator app, and has held it to their own team's review since. Any findings produced solely by the family side would inevitably be challenged as unverifiable by skeptics. Any findings produced solely by the state, given how the earliest days of this investigation were handled and how that first foul play statement landed, would likely be met with real distrust by a family that has spent 2 weeks feeling shut out of their own son's case. A joint extraction, both sets of experts watching the same data appear on the same screen at the same moment, removes that entire category of dispute before it can even start. Whatever is found, or whatever provably was on that device at some point and later removed, arrives without a competing narrative attached to it from either side. How unusual is an arrangement like this? Legal experts following the case closely have noted that evidence in active investigations is almost never shared this openly. Prosecutors rarely open their own forensic process to a victim's private investigative team in real time. That the district attorney agreed to it here says something meaningful about the pressure surrounding this case, and about how central that single device has become to public trust in whatever answer eventually surfaces. That grand jury referral, however, has not been received as unambiguous good news by everyone watching this case closely, and we think it is important to include that dissent honestly rather than present the referral as a simple victory. Some legal observers have publicly raised concerns about District Attorney McElrath's office, pointing to its history in earlier, unrelated cases where they argue substantial evidence still failed to produce an indictment. They have argued that a grand jury referral alone should not automatically be mistaken for meaningful progress, and have said they intend to keep watching the specific case closely to make sure it does not quietly stall the way they believe past cases have. A different, more measured read offered by other attorneys following the case explains that a grand jury referral is actually routine, standard procedure in this county for any death considered unnatural or suspicious, not, by itself, proof that foul play has been confirmed or even strongly suspected by investigators. Both perspectives deserve to be held at the same time, without one canceling out the other. The skepticism comes from real, specific history with how prosecutorial discretion has played out in other cases in this exact jurisdiction. The more measured explanation comes from an accurate description of how these referrals typically function as a matter of ordinary process. Both things can be true simultaneously. This can be standard procedure, and this specific office's track record can still deserve close, continued attention from a public that has learned, over the course of this case, not to take official reassurance at face value. The real test here isn't the referral itself. It's what actually happens once a grand jury eventually receives whatever evidence this investigation ultimately produces. Because so much public conversation around this case jumps straight to the word homicide the moment a grand jury is mentioned, it's worth spending a moment walking through what that panel could realistically be asked away, based on how legal analysts have described similar cases. Presenting a case to a grand jury does not mean prosecutors are only considering the most serious possible charge. It means they are asking a panel of ordinary citizens to review whatever evidence exists and decide if any criminal charge of any kind is supported by probable cause. That is a far broader question than most people assume when they hear the word grand jury attached to a case like this one. Legal analysts who have discussed this case publicly have pointed out that the range of charges theoretically available in a case like this one is wide. It could involve nothing at all, if the evidence ultimately supports a conclusion that this was a tragic accidental drowning with no criminal conduct attached to it whatsoever. It could involve something far short of homicide, such as obstruction of justice, or accessory after the fact, if the evidence shows someone interfered with the investigation without being responsible for Nolan's death itself. It could, in theory, involve a homicide-related charge, ranging anywhere from negligent homicide to manslaughter to murder, if the evidence ultimately shows someone's actions directly cause his death, or that his death occurred amid the kind of altercation multiple people have referenced in vague terms without ever fully describing what actually happened. Nobody, including the attorneys closest to this case, currently knows which of those outcomes, if any, the evidence will ultimately support. That range matters because it explains why so much of the public conversation around this case has felt unsatisfying so far. People want a single, clean answer. Either this was a tragic accident and nothing more, or it was something far darker. The actual legal process sitting underneath this case is built to weigh a much wider spectrum of possibilities than that, using evidence, not intuition. And the honest answer tonight is that nobody outside a very small circle of investigators currently knows where on that spectrum this case is going to land. It's also worth remembering, because it keeps getting lost in the noise, that determining whether someone caused a death is a meaningfully different legal question than determining whether someone behaved suspiciously after a death occurred. A slow response from friends, an unanswered phone call, an unusual GPS gap, a discrepancy in an official report, none of that on its own proves anyone caused Nolan's death. It can, however, support entirely separate charges related to how the aftermath was handled. If investigators find evidence that anyone deliberately withheld information, altered evidence, or misled the investigation in a material way. Those two categories of potential wrongdoing, causing a death and obstructing an investigation into one, are not the same thing legally, even though public conversation about this case has often treated them as interchangeable. We raise this not to speculate about which of these outcomes is likely, because we genuinely do not know, and neither does anyone without direct access to the sealed autopsy results and the yet-to-be jointly examined phone. We raise it because understanding the actual shape of this legal process is the only way to read whatever comes out of that grand jury room, whenever it eventually convenes, without either overreacting to a result that turns out to be procedural or underreacting to one that turns out to carry real weight. Before we move any further tonight, we owe you two corrections, because two separate claims spread everywhere in this case shaped what millions of people believed about it, and both have now been formally run down by credible reporting. If we're asking you to trust how we're covering this story, we owe you our corrections with the exact same volume and seriousness as our claims. The first was a photograph. After Nolan's body was found, an image of him at a pool party began circulating online with a devastating implication attached to it that the photo had been taken after the 4th of July, meaning that somewhere in the timeline, Nolan had still been alive. For a short, disorienting stretch, people shared that image genuinely believing it meant this story wasn't what everyone feared it was. Nolan's own family had to watch that false hope spread publicly, while already knowing, somewhere underneath the grief, that it likely wasn't real. Rolling Stone eventually settled the question using the one kind of evidence that doesn't misremember anything at all: photo metadata pulled directly from the image file itself. The image was actually taken on June 27th, a full 8 days before Nolan ever set foot on Horn Island. It had simply been uploaded on July 5th, which is what created the confusion in the first place. A close friend of Nolan's, Trayston Shepard, independently confirmed the date and identified the people in the photo, including Nolan himself, as having been at that party the night it was actually taken, more than a week before the trip that ended his life. There's a detail inside this correction that fairness requires including, because it's part of the honest record too. Attorney Ben Crump had reposted that same image while the false timeline claim was still actively circulating, and when asked about it directly by reporters, he did not walk it back quietly. His explanation on the record was that his team reposts circulating material specifically to generate calls and tips from potential witnesses, and that reposting something is not the same thing as authenticating it. You can judge that strategy however you like. A legal team already drowning in tips chose reach over caution in that moment, and one cost of that choice was a grieving public briefly believing a timeline that was never real. Both things are true, and both belong in this record. The second correction involves a video. A clip circulated widely showing what many people believe was an argument involving Nolan shortly before he disappeared, a voice many were convinced belonged to him, seemingly demanding a phone back from someone. Trayston Shepard ended that specific claim himself, directly, on the record with more than one outlet. The voice on that recording, he has confirmed clearly and repeatedly, is his own, not Nolan's. It came from a completely separate altercation that had nothing at all to do with Nolan, wrongly stitched onto this case by a million anonymous shares chasing engagement. Both of these corrections trace back to the exact same underlying pattern that has defined this entire case from the outside. In the vacuum created by two still pending autopsies, unverified claims have consistently traveled faster than confirmed facts. That pattern is worth remembering with every new detail in this case, including everything we've covered tonight. Confirmed information and secondhand claims can look nearly identical at first glance, side by side on the same social media feed. The only reliable way to tell them apart is to keep asking every single time exactly where a given detail actually came from, and whether anyone with real authority to know has actually confirmed it. There's one more piece of misinformation worth addressing directly, because it inflated public expectations about where this investigation actually stands. The claim that the FBI had fully taken over the case. It has not, by the Bureau's own statement, which we walked through in detail earlier tonight. The FBI's Jackson office has assisted Jackson County investigators on specific elements of this case, centered largely on threats made against people connected to it. Threats that crossed state lines and therefore became federal business in their own right. That is support, not command. And it says something genuinely uncomfortable about what parts of this case have become in certain online spaces. That federal law enforcement's involvement here isn't primarily about how Nolan Wells died at all. It is, at least in significant part, about conduct serious enough against people connected to this investigation to trigger federal jurisdiction on its own. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has been the lead agency since the very first search boat left the dock on July 5th, and it remains the lead agency tonight, 16 days later. Tomorrow, Monday, July 20th, Nolan Wells will be laid to rest at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation runs from 9 to 11 in the morning, with the funeral service beginning immediately after. There's a detail worth including here that hasn't gotten as much attention elsewhere as it deserves. Officials initially discussed holding the service at the Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center in Biloxi, a much larger public venue better suited to the scale of attention this case has drawn. The family ultimately chose to bring Nolan home to Center Point Church instead, closer to the community that actually raised him, the same community that watched him grow up on Friday nights under stadium lights. Officials confirmed the funeral would not, after all, be held at the Coliseum, and the family's decision to choose a smaller, more familiar church over a larger public venue says something quiet but important about what this family wants tomorrow to actually feel like. Not a spectacle, a homecoming. Reverend Al Sharpton will deliver the eulogy. Attorney Ben Crump will deliver a separate address described as a call to justice. Actor and filmmaker Tyler Perry has confirmed he is covering the full cost of the funeral. Former NFL player Colin Kaepernick has helped fund the independent autopsy still pending in Washington, D.C. The community's response to this family goes well beyond those two names, though. A GoFundMe organized for family has raised well over $700,000 as of this week, with donations arriving from across the country, including a significant contribution from BuzzFeed CEO Byron Allen. Local officials in the region have reportedly been in near daily contact with Christine, checking in personally, an ordinary act of decency that stands out against the backdrop of a national media storm. Think about what tomorrow actually means for a moment. A funeral is, in almost every ordinary circumstance, one of the most private rituals a family goes through, a closed circle of grief shared only with the people who actually knew the person being buried. This funeral will be something else entirely. According to the family's own announcement, the service will be open to media and will be described in their words as a gathering where family, friends, and community members come together to celebrate Nolan's life and honor his memory. That framing, celebrate rather than simply mourn, was chosen deliberately by his mother. After the formal service, the family will hold a gathering separate from the funeral itself. Christine Wansley has described it as something different from a traditional repast. We want to celebrate Nolan, she has said publicly. He would not want us sitting around crying and eating. Sit with that for a second. This is a mother in the middle of a national media storm, navigating press conferences, an unresolved investigation, and relentless waves of online speculation. Still pause and think carefully about what her own son would have actually wanted from the day people gathered to say goodbye to him. Not what she wants in this exact moment of grief. Not what the public expects from a grieving parent standing in front of cameras. What Nolan, the young man everyone keeps describing by a smile, would have actually wanted to see. There's something worth sitting with about the timing of everything covered tonight, arriving in these final hours before Nolan is laid to rest. The FBI statement, Katie's account, the threat reporting, all of it landing right before his family walks into a church to bury their son, which means they will carry every one of these open threads with them tomorrow morning, entirely unresolved. They will stand in that building celebrating their son's life while a grand jury referral sits somewhere in the future, while 2 autopsies remain unfinished, while a contradiction about his final conversation remains unsettled, and while, according to confirmed FBI reporting, a threat investigation continues quietly in the background. Grief, in this case, has never once gotten a chance to exist entirely on its own, separate from everything else surrounding it. Tomorrow will not change that reality. It will only give this family a few hours, explicitly set aside to try, before we move into where this case stands as of tonight. And where it goes from here, one more moment for the channel itself. We know this has been a long, detail-heavy update, and if you've made it this far, that tells us you actually care about getting this story right rather than just skimming a headline somewhere. That's exactly the kind of viewer we would love to have as a subscriber. Right now, we got a real gap between how many people are watching these videos and how many are actually part of this community. If tonight's breakdown helped you understand this case better than anything else you've come across on it, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here the moment the next confirmed detail breaks. We appreciate every single one of you who's stuck with the story from the very beginning. There's a part of this case that doesn't fit neatly into a timeline or a legal filing, and we would be doing this family a disservice if we skip past it tonight, because it is happening to them at the exact same moment as everything else we've covered. This story has not stayed contained to Ocean Springs. It has become, whether anyone involved wanted it to or not, a national conversation about race, about which missing person cases receive urgent coverage and which ones quietly fade, and about how quickly grief gets absorbed into a much larger, much louder argument that has very little to do with the actual 18-year-old at the center of it. Civil rights leaders have stood beside this family from the earliest days of this case, and that presence has brought resources, attention, and pressure that a family without that kind of platform might never have received. It has also brought a level of scrutiny, argument, and at times outright hostility toward everyone connected to this case that has made an already unbearable situation harder to carry. We want to be careful here, because this is exactly the kind of territory where a channel like ours can either add something useful or simply add more noise to a story that already has more than enough of it. So here is what we can say honestly. Questions about how quickly and how thoroughly a case is investigated, questions about whether certain victims receive faster, more resource attention than others, are legitimate questions that communities across this country have been asking for a long time, in case after case, well before Nolan Wells ever became a name anyone outside Mississippi had heard. Those questions do not require anyone to have already decided what happened to Nolan in order to be worth asking. They are structural questions about how investigations get resourced and prioritized, and they exist independently of whatever the toxicology results eventually say. At the same time, we want to be honest about something else. None of the young people who were on that island with Nolan that day have been named suspects. None of them have been charged with a single crime. The friends who have spoken publicly, imperfectly, sometimes contradicting each other on small details like an exact hour or a specific piece of clothing, are still, as of tonight, private citizens who have not been formally accused of anything by anyone with the legal authority to accuse them. Several of them have said on the record that they have received death threats over the course of this case, which is precisely the kind of interstate conduct the FBI's own statement has confirmed it is now investigating. Holding all of that at once is difficult, and it is supposed to be difficult because this is a genuinely difficult situation. A family deserves urgency and transparency they have not always received. A community has legitimate historical reasons to ask hard questions about how cases like this one get handled. And a group of teenagers, whatever they may or may not know about that afternoon, do not deserve to have their names turned into targets before a single piece of forensic evidence has actually been weighed by anyone with the authority to weigh it. That tension sits underneath every single piece of this story, whether anyone says it out loud or not. And we think it is more honest to name it directly than pretend it isn't there. It's worth asking, honestly, why a single death on a remote Mississippi island has held the attention of this many people for this long, when so many other tragic, unexplained deaths never make it past a local news cycle at all. Part of the answer is simply the shape of the story itself. An 18-year-old, healthy, athletic, well-liked, vanishes from a crowded holiday gathering in broad daylight, surrounded by dozens of witnesses, and is later found dead a short distance from where he was last seen. There is no dramatic villain in the traditional sense, no masked figure, no forced entry, no obvious crime scene. Instead, there is something far harder to sit with, an ordinary afternoon that somehow produced an extraordinary tragedy, and a gap in the timeline that nobody, not investigators, not friends, not family, has been able to close. Part of the answer is also the way information has arrived in this case, in small, incomplete pieces, over more than 2 weeks. Each new detail reopening questions that seemed close to settle the day before. A sheriff's early statement that foul play wasn't suspected. A family's public disagreement with that framing. A viral photo that turned out to be old. A viral video that turned out to be someone else's voice entirely. A GPS record that quietly rewrote the accepted timeline. An FBI statement that answered one question while raising several new ones. Each of these moments has functioned almost like a chapter break, closing one question just long enough for the next one to open, which is exactly the kind of structure that keeps a story alive in the public imagination long after most cases, like it would have quietly faded from the news cycle. And part of the answer, the part that matters most, and the part we want to end on, is simply Nolan himself. Every person who has spoken publicly about him, teachers, coaches, teammates, even reporters who never met him, describes the same thing in slightly different words. A kid who made people feel noticed. A kid who cooked dinner for his parents the night before he disappeared. A kid whose own mother, in the middle of unimaginable grief, is still thinking about what he would have wanted his own funeral to feel like. That is not the kind of detail that trends because it is dramatic. It trends because it is recognizable. Because almost everyone watching this story has someone in their own life who fits that same description. And because losing someone like that, under circumstances nobody can yet explain, taps into something that has nothing to do with true crime as entertainment and everything to do with basic human empathy. We think that distinction matters, and we think it's worth naming directly before we close tonight's update. This case deserves careful attention because a family deserves answers, not because it makes for compelling content. Every fact we've walked through tonight exists in service of that first goal. If it also makes for a story worth watching, that is because the truth, told carefully and honestly, almost always is. Let's pull everything together, because in a story moving this fast, it genuinely helps to say plainly, in one place, exactly what is confirmed and what is not as of the night before Nolan Wells is laid to rest. There is still no official cause of death. The state autopsy, conducted on July 7th, the day after Nolan's body was recovered, remains sealed behind toxicology testing that officials say must be completed before any cause or manner of death can be formally ruled. Toxicology results, as anyone who follows cases like this one knows, routinely take days to weeks depending on lab capacity, and there is still no announced timeline for when they will be complete. The independent autopsy, the one Nolan's family flew him to Washington, D.C. for, funded in part through Colin Kaepernick's foundation, has been delayed by logistical complications, and its results have not been released either. The family's legal team says only that they hope to share those findings soon, the same phrase they have used for more than a week now. The sheriff's official position has not fundamentally changed since those first. Consequential words were spoken nearly 2 weeks ago. Investigators say they have found no evidence of foul play, and the case remains classified as a death investigation rather than a criminal one. That word, classified, is doing careful work here because a classification is a status, not a permanent verdict. It can change the day toxicology results land, the day the jointly examined phone reveals something unexpected, or the day a grand jury decides it should change. Nothing about the current label closes this case. In fact, the district attorney's own commitment to a future grand jury referral is proof that the system itself isn't treating this as finished. The family's position hasn't changed either, and if anything, this week has only added to the list of unresolved threads they are carrying. A mismatched clothing color, a delay retrieving car keys, a phone that arrived home silent and empty, an unexplained 90-minute gap now confirmed by GPS data, a direct contradiction between Katie's account and the account given by Nolan's friends, and now, confirmed threats serious enough to draw federal involvement. Nobody has been charged with anything. Nobody has been officially named a suspect. The grand jury is waiting on the sheriff's office to finish its work. The joint phone inspection agreed to on July 15th has not yet taken place, as far as the public record shows. One more piece of tonight's record belongs entirely to Christine Wansley, in her own words. As the funeral approached this week, she described this loss, this grief, this particular pain, as different, a short phrase doing the work of an entire chapter of grief. Different, not simply because her son is gone at 18, but because she has had to mourn him inside an unfinished question, in full public view, on a schedule set by laboratories and legal calendars entirely outside her control. Which brings this update back to the question the whole night hangs on. Two people heard Nolan Wells describe his final plan for that afternoon, and they heard opposite things. This week, for the first time, a machine drew hard, undeniable lines around exactly where the truth of that afternoon has to live. After his last confirmed sighting around 3 o'clock, before a documented departure at 4:31. Somewhere inside the 90 minutes in between that, no account from anyone has ever fully described. Every witness call still coming into the family's legal team. Every fragment eventually pulled from that phone. Every fact the district attorney eventually carries into a future grand jury room. All of it now gets measured against those exact timestamps. Human accounts can bend under pressure, under grief, under fear, under 2 weeks of national scrutiny nobody involved ever asked for. A GPS record does not bend. And somewhere between 3 o'clock and 4:31 in the afternoon on July 4th, the story people have been telling for 2 weeks, and the record the state actually captured, are eventually going to meet. Here is the visible road ahead of this case, laid out as plainly as we can lay it out tonight. Tomorrow morning, the funeral, likely to be watched by an audience far beyond Ocean Springs itself. People who never knew Nolan Wells personally, but who have followed every twist of this story for over 2 weeks now. After that, the independent autopsy results, which the family's legal team says they hope to release soon, arguably the single development most likely to reshape everything else in this case once it finally lands. The joint phone inspection, agreed to but not yet scheduled as of tonight, with its answer to the question of the missing Snapchat data still waiting somewhere inside it. The state's toxicology results, still pending. Still the single largest blocker standing between this case and an official cause of death. The sheriff's investigation, continuing to run its course on its own timeline, independent of public pressure or the calendar of a viral news cycle. And at the end of that road, eventually, a room in Jackson County where 15 to 25 ordinary citizens will hear all of it laid out together, the witness accounts, the timestamps, the forensic extraction, the toxicology findings, and decide, using the legal standard the process actually requires, what this case becomes next. Every one of those developments will be covered here on this channel, the moment it is actually confirmed, not a moment before. And underneath every timestamp and every legal term we've walked through tonight, there is still a town holding its breath. Ocean Springs is a community that watched Nolan Wells grow up, that cheered for him under Friday night lights, whose own teenagers organized marches in his name and were gently asked by his mother to keep them peaceful, because that is who her son was. Tomorrow, that same town fills a church for him, the distance between a graduation stage and a funeral, separated by only a few weeks and one afternoon on an island, is the true size of what this family is carrying right now, tonight, as they lay out clothes that will never be worn again. While the rest of the country continues debating the details of this case online, we intend to keep doing exactly what we've done in every update so far, waiting for confirmation before we report anything as fact, separating what a family has said from what has been independently verified by credible sources, flagging fabricated content the moment we find it, even when it means admitting we nearly walked into it ourselves, and refusing to let speculation dressed up as a scoop take priority over a family that is already carrying more than any family should ever have to carry. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He cooked dinner for his parents the night before he left home for the last time. He was, by every single account from the people who actually knew him, the kind of person who made others feel like they mattered simply by paying attention to them. Tomorrow, his community gathers to say goodbye to that young man, not to a case number, not to a contested timeline, not to a GPS coordinate, but to him. We will be back the moment there is a confirmed update, whether that is a result of an autopsy, the findings of a joint phone examination, or the next step this investigation takes toward that grand jury room. Until then, if this story has stayed with you the way it has clearly stayed with the people of Ocean Springs, do one small thing before you close this video. Leave his name in the comments below, written with respect. Let this space be about who Nolan Wells actually was, not just the theories still circling around him. Rest easy, Nolan. We'll see you in the next update.